did you realize you had a generation gap between you and someone else? It was quite evident for me. I was standing here on a stage. But first, I'd like to recreate for you today an important moment, iconic moment in our American history. Are you ready? See if you know who this is. Not sure yet? I'll give you another hint. Well, everyone knows that's John Travolta from the movie Saturday Night Fever, or at least I thought. Because when I looked out into the audience, I saw a group of young attendees, and they had that look of bewilderment. And I saw them, and I said, "Excuse me, you look puzzled. Do you know who that is?" And they all looked at me and said no. They did not have a clue. Now, I like this story because I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and the nightclub in the movie Saturday Night Fever is the one I used to get into as a teenager with my fake ID. I looked it up. Saturday Night Fever debuted in 1977. That's almost 50 years ago. They could not relate. And there was my generation gap. It was also a huge communications gap. Now, there are 4 generations that comprise 96% of our workforce today. Now, I like to describe the generations using events. So in their formative years, baby boomers had Woodstock. They also had disco. And Neil Armstrong was the first person on the moon. Gen X, they saw the fall of the Berlin Wall and the rise of MTV. Millennials, they wrestled with the Great Recession and the infancy of social media. And Gen Zs, they got hit with COVID, and they are the first group who cannot fathom a world without smartphones. Communication barriers between multi-generational groups is quite difficult. The inability to communicate with different people in different generations in the workplace can lead to lower productivity, greater conflict, and high turnover. So how do we bridge the gap? To me, I have identified 3 ways to bridge the gap and break down those barriers. Number 1, be aware of the gap, just like Travolta. Tony Robbins says, to communicate effectively, we must all realize that we are all different in the way we perceive the world. And we need to use that information as a guide to talk to others. Most companies, to better communicate with other employees, use a method, and it's called mentoring. They take the senior level people, and they help the junior level people learn about the business, learn about the company, and what they're trying to accomplish. Basically show them the ropes. There is a company, it's a beer maker, Heineken, USA. In 2021, they took the mentoring concept and flipped it. They called it reverse mentoring. They took junior level people, junior level marketers, made them the mentors, And the senior level marketers were the mentees. The mentors took the older group and taught them all about lifestyles. They taught them about consumer trends, and they taught them about digital media. The older group took that information and used it in their marketing plans to reach different audiences. The CEO, Maggie Timoney, she said this reverse mentoring really helped the company in, one, developing talent, and two, mitigating age-related biases within the company. Number two, deliver across the gap. I spent a whole career in advertising as a media buyer. But for 2 years, I went on the sales side. And my new boss said to me, who was older than I was, Peter, you need to make 50 calls a day, cold calls. You have to make them if you want to be successful. I said, okay. So after a month, I made 200 calls. 8 people called me back. And I thought that was bad. He said, no, that's good. But I realized something unique about the people who were calling me back. They were all like me. They were baby boomers. I said, if they're the only ones calling me back, where's everyone else? Well, I found out each generation has their own mode of communication. Baby boomers love to talk, so their mode of communication is the phone. Gen X, they don't talk, they email. Millennials, they don't email, they text. And Gen Zs, they don't text, they swipe. And they swipe and they swipe and they swipe all over the place. I'm like, who are you swiping? It's a different mode of communication. So if you ever have a meeting at the office and it's over, find out how we're going to communicate the next steps. Are we going to have another meeting? Are we going to email? Are we going to text? Or are we going to swipe? Finally, number 3. Number 3 is look beyond the gap. You want to look beyond the gap. And what I really tell people is you need to engage. Because once you know you're aware, and once you know how to deliver, you can engage. Now, I love AC/DC. It's a classic rock band for those of you who don't know. And our feisty Gen Z daughter, Morgan, you learned all the songs from AC/DC on road trips by sitting in the back of the car. She works as a bartender at the famous 5-star Farrington Village in Chapel Hill. It's a very bougie place. She saw the boomer walking towards her, and he got up to the bar. And he said, I'll have an old-fashioned. And she noticed he already had 2 singles in his fingers that he was going to put into the tip jar. Morgan says to him, excuse me, sir, I'd like to ask you a question. He says, sure, what is it? What's your favorite AC/DC album? He gave her that puzzled look like, you know who AC/DC is? Of course I do. My favorite album is Back in Black. What's yours? And a 5-minute conversation ensued. She finished the drink, handed it to him. He looked at the 2 singles in his hand. He took them back, put it in his pocket. He pulled out his wallet, pulled out a 20, and put it in the tip jar. Now, my wife and I raised a very smart Gen Z. And she's thinking, she rinsed and repeat that whole scenario all night long. And at the end of the evening, she ended up with 6 Benjamins. And if you don't know what a Benjamin is, that's urban slang for $100. Our daughter Morgan was aware, she delivered, and she engaged. So I'm proud of her. She was brave, and she was also brilliant. You know what she did? She bridged the gap. So awareness, delivery, engagement. If you do these things, you will communicate better with your family, your friends, and most of all, your coworkers. It's very important that you do that. If you do that at work, you will see higher productivity, lower conflict, and low turnover. And it'll be a happier place to work. So, stop your jive talking, put on your boogie shoes, and you'll be staying alive at the office by bridging the gap.